Alright guys, welcome back to another windy day here on Grow the Earth. So if my audio is kind of messed up, it's because we're having really bad windstorm right now. But you know, we were fixing to plant some trees, so I figured I'd video it and give you guys kind of the tips and ideas that we use, and some are, you know, the recommendations you actually find on the plant themselves whenever you buy it. And others are just things that I do that has ensured that we get a good, healthy transplant. You don't have any transplant shock, because as you can see right now, this tree is actually already starting to leave out. We've had some really late cold snaps here, and we weren't able to get them in before winter set in, and didn't want to try and put them in and then have another freeze, which would probably kill the plant because it being freshly transplanted. So today we're going to plant this tree. So just for information's sake, this is a fig tree, if you didn't know already. And we actually have a spot here that we had a previous fig tree in. But actually I did something that was improper, in that I wanted to put a border around it, and I added some more dirt to it, and the dirt came up on the stem above where it had already been, and it actually caused the tree to rot out and die. Now I know that you can do this with some other trees, you can do this with certain plants, but obviously a fig tree is not one of those things, because it caused it to start rotting from the stem. So first thing that we've got to look at, and we've got to consider whenever we're planting a tree, is the size of pot that this tree is in. Now this is in your typical 3-gallon pot, which is roughly 10 inches by 12 inches. So rule of thumb, and what I usually do, is you dig a hole that is twice the width and twice the depth of whatever pot it is in. Now this is going to serve two purposes. This is going to let you spread out the roots if this tree is root bound. This is also going to give this tree the best chance it's going to have to spread its roots out and get a good root system going before it gets into the native soil. Now, why, you would ask, why would you want to do that? These things grow in native soil. Well, yes they do, but here in Texas along the Gulf Coast, we have a thing called gumbo, which is basically a mixture of topsoil and clay and silt and many other things. It's very nutrient dense, but it is a bear for roots to grow through. Oak trees grow well down here because their roots are so hardy that they'll almost push through rock. But a fig tree is a little more delicate, and it's going to need that extra strength in order to push into that gumbo and to really push out from wherever you've dug your hole. So we need to dig out a large hole, fill it with some better soil in order for that tree to have the best chance it can have to establish its root ball and establish its root system before it starts trying to push into these other areas and has a harder time getting into them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and dig this hole, and whenever we get through with that, I'll bring you back and we can have a good look and show you what size hole we're digging. Alright, so now we've got this hole dug. Now I'm going to show you about what we're dealing with here. And keep in mind, this is a 3-gallon pot. If you've got a 5-gallon pot, your hole's going to have to be a little bit bigger than this. But I'm going to bring you guys in close and show you what I'm looking at here. Alright, so here we are. Here's our hole. Now, keep in mind, the camera is not going to really show a scale, but this is our pot with our 3-gallon plant in it. Now, you're looking at that, and here's a level view from the top of our grass. Now, granted, this is not exactly twice the depth of this, and there's a reason behind that. The reason is, when you plant this tree, you're going to plant the depth that it is at in that pot a little proud of the ground. You want it up about an inch, inch and a half. You basically, whenever you get through putting this plant in the hole, you want to have basically a mound with the tree at the top of that mound. And what that is going to do is that is going to allow for sinkage, where that tree, when everything settles, it's going to be level with the ground, and it's not going to have a dish or a bowl in it to collect that water. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to pull this tree out of this hole, and I'm going to fill this with topsoil, compost, things like that. Now you'll see other people that will tell you, there's a certain planting method for trees. You know, you dig a 4x4 hole and you put rocks and you put gravel and then sand and then, you know, regular native soil and then compost and then regular soil on top of that, and it's this whole long process. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong in any way. I've never tried it. I can't say that it's one way is better than the other, but this is the way that I plant trees, and I have not had a problem. The only time that I have ever lost a tree is because it has gotten so large that I couldn't cover it whenever our winter hit. And usually for us here in the south, what happens is that first hard freeze shocks these plants, because they were usually in 80-degree weather before that, and the plant goes through a shock. It doesn't get that normal cool down cycle to where it starts protecting itself, just like the plants that I showed you guys before. It goes through a shock and it can die at that time, because it went from summer type weather to cold, you know, winter type weather for our area within a couple of days. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fill this hole, and I'll bring you back, and I'm going to show you another couple of things that I do to ensure that this tree is going to make it. All right, guys, so now I have actually taken the dirt I took out of this hole. Now, granted, some of this was decent dirt because of the previous tree I'd planted, but I dug the hole out a little bit bigger, so I did get some of that gumbo in it. And I actually just took that and I put it in the corner of a compost pile. Because what I'll do later is I will take my tiller and I will turn that into my compost to add some of the nutrients that actually compost lacks. So I've taken some of our compost from here out of our compost bed, and some of it is actually some dirt that we have put back there from earlier this year whenever we had to top off our beds and things like that. And I've already filled up the hole to about where I think I'm going to need to set the bottom of that root ball. And I've got our old trusty friend Microlife Ultimate. Now I've got about 2 cups here, which is going to be way too much for this hole to put down in the bottom of it. But I'm actually going to split it and use it in 2 different ways. Half of it, which would be about a cup of it, I'm going to spread around the bottom of this hole where the root ball is going to sit. The rest of it, I'm actually going to put it into a bucket and put about a gallon to a gallon and a half of water in it and let it sit. Because that's one of the awesome things about Microlife Ultimate is you can actually use this as a nutrient drench. If you put about a cup of this in about a gallon to a gallon and a half of water, it will break down and disperse in the water to where you can use it as a nutrient drench. You can actually spread this right on top of the ground as a top dressing. You can actually spread it along the side of the plants in trenches as a side dressing. So we're going to take this, we're going to put it in the water, and we're going to let it start steeping while we're planting this tree here. Now I know there's going to be some of you guys who are going to say, well, Tommy, why did you put that fertilizer right in the bottom of that hole where the roots of that tree are going to be touching it? And I'll tell you, that's because this is an all-natural, slow-release fertilizer. And what that is going to do is it's not going to release its nutrients all at one time like a chemical fertilizer, but is actually going to slowly break down and release its nutrients over time, which will give that tree time to take those nutrients up and actually use them. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put this tree in the ground. Now, this is just like a plant that you've got in a pot. You want to take it, set it on its side, and kind of loosen it around. Make sure that that root ball is pulled away. And you can turn it on its side, or you can just pick it up. And I know there's a lot of people that will say never pick up anything by its stalk, but I do, because I don't follow rules quite often. And what we're going to do is we're going to examine this. Now, what I do see is that this thing has got roots galore. And they've actually started growing around in a circle to be as they were constrained by this pot. So, we're just going to take our hand and we're going to loosen as many of these roots as we can, so that we can kind of spread these out in this hole and let them be free and start growing outwards instead of around in a circle inside of a pot. Now, not only is this necessary for the outside, but also we want to get our hand underneath and get to the center of this and really kind of loosen it up. You can give it some pats and some rubs and, you know, massage it out to where we can start letting these roots kind of work their way outward. Now, since we have done that, our root ball has kind of gotten a little shorter, right? So we're going to take some more of this and we're going to put it down in this hole to build up underneath our plant, and we're going to kind of spread those roots around and outwards. All right, now that we've got that in there, and we've taken the roots and we've kind of spread them out away from the tree to, you know, because that's normally how roots do. They're going to grow down and they're going to grow out. They don't grow in circles, which is one mistake that a lot of people make whenever they are planting trees, is they don't loosen up the root ball enough to let those roots kind of run out the way that they need to, because those roots are searching for nutrients, and if they're running around in a circle, they're going to continue to try and run around a circle. They're not going to unfurl themselves to grow outwards into the dirt like you would need. Now that we've got this laid out as best as we can, we're going to fill in with more of our compost slash soil, so forth. All right, now that we've got our dirt down here, we want to do two things. We want to make sure that we pay attention to where that root line was, where the plant was sitting in its pot, because we do not want to put any dirt above that. And secondly, we want to make sure that we heap this dirt up around this plant, because of course this is a loose soil and it is going to sink. And again, like I said in the beginning, we don't want that furrow, we don't want a dish or a bowl around this tree, because the extra water that will hold there is going to inhibit this thing growing, and it could possibly kill it. Now, while we've been doing this, I've been having that cup of Microlife Ultimate over there steeping in about 1 gallon to 1.5 gallons of water. Now, I have a nutrient drench that I can spread over the top of this, which is going to give this a kickstart of nutrients to do a couple of things. Actually, it's going to help the roots get established again. It's going to keep from stressing this plant out, and is going to help with the development of this tree as it finds life in its new surroundings. Because we just jerked this thing up out of what it's been living in for the past 6, 8, 10 months, 12 months, depending on how long this tree has been in that pot. And you just put it into a strange environment, you've messed with its roots, and you've added soil that it is not used to anymore. And so we want to give it as many nutrients. We want to give it all the nutrients it could ever want. We want to make sure that we water it very well. That's the other key thing is, once I put this nutrient drench on here and it soaks in, I'm going to come back and I'm going to really, really water this, because I don't want it to dry out. I don't want it to have dry roots. I want it to have everything that it could ever want and ever need in order to get established and get back to growing and doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is producing lovely figs for me. Now, one tip that I almost forgot is, when you are planting these trees, you get a very limited amount of time to make sure that this thing is going to grow straight up. Over the next couple of days, as this soil settles, we need to make sure that we are checking to make sure that this tree is still growing straight. Because what will happen is, if one side settles more than the other, we're going to have a tree that's going to tilt and lean to one side or the other, or front to back, or so forth. Right now, with these high winds we're having, you can have the same thing. The tree will push one way once we give this soil some moisture, and it starts to move and roam. So the next couple of days after you plant this, and when you start watering it, make sure that if it moves, that we correct it. Because again, after about 1.5 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, you're not going to be able to move this tree from where it's at. You're not going to be able to correct the path that you've sent it on. It's kind of like with our children. We get a few years as we're raising these kids before we project them out into the world. And if we don't have them on the straight and the narrow path, if we don't have God in their life, and we don't have them growing straight, if they're growing off of an angle, or if they're growing crooked, once they're established in that kind of way, we're not going to be able to correct it. It's going to be very hard to correct that. You're almost going to have to dig it up and completely break it down in order to reset it to where it grows straight. So again, in this formative time, when we're planting this tree, we need to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure it grows straight, because the second time around it's going to be a lot harder than if we just do our due diligence now and correct it as we can. So guys, I've still got some cleanup here. I've got some more dirt to move back and away, and I've got to build my border around this, and some other nice things. But I thank you for coming and joining me today. I thank you for watching this. I hope the information that I've given you found helpful and useful, and hopefully you can apply it for your fruit trees. So guys, as always, I ask you to pray over your family, pray over your garden, and have a great day.